music is an essential commodity for any society. You know, people have been making music long before they built houses, or grew food, or maybe even talked. And it's a way people bind together as a community. It's the way they share their hopes and fears and their emotions and their bodies. And in that sense, it's a very valuable thing to do. It's a very good thing to do for people. It's like baking bread or building houses. It has its own reward. And if someone's inspired by it, great. But if I get up and play a show and people have a great time, basically my job is done. I've done everything I needed to do. I go home, sleep soundly, get up and do it the next day. And as long as I can do that, I'll at least know I'm doing something worthwhile.
When I set out on this journey, I thought it would never end. When I started down that road, I could not see the end. And when I took that first step, I fell in so deep, so deep. And all the things that were so hard won. You know, I thought...
So punk rock just was like a bag. It was just people who obviously didn't give a shit. And that is how about virtually everything.
If people use it the right way, it's the perfect music to piss off the police, your parents, your boss, your teachers.
We were definitely the most hated band for miles around.
It really reflected the culture of where people grew up. You know, it was like, here was like really middle-class, white, suburban kids with all this crazy energy.
It was just, oh, great, you can play, you play the bass, I'll play the guitar, somewhere we'll find a drummer and we'll get a band. And that's what we did.
It was like a confluence of all sorts of different people who had different interests in various forms of the arts, you know?
Cultures like punk rock breed more culture. They get kids thinking.
Think for yourself and do it yourself. They are the two really enduring things that I got out of it.
It's funny, I went on a trip all through BC. I was trying to figure out where I wanted to live. I knew that Victoria was super cool just based on the bands that I listened to, right? I knew something was up over there, and so right away I felt that sort of community vibe there, and I was into No Means No and the Neos and all these bands that I kind of was listening to from afar, and when I got there, I could right away I could see their stamp on the scene.
We had a very, very prolific music scene. Capital city on an island, you know, which really is something extraordinary about our scene.
This has always had kind of a small British town feel to it, which means it's also feels sort of a bit repressed and a bit overly quiet and proper.
It's a clean little government town that really wants to keep all subversive behavior well under control. And there's just about anything that's cool and fun for kids to do has been outlawed in this town, and Victoria's not supportive of their youth at all. And I think the byproduct of that is it's made a breeding ground for some really good punk bands.
I'm Andy Kerr, and I got into punk rock after I heard the Sex Pistols. I saw a review of them in Rolling Stone magazine and was mesmerized by Johnny Rotten's evil glare, and I didn't dare go and buy the album for fear of bringing it home and having my parents see the word Sex Pistols written in green letters on a huge pink background. But third time around, down to Kelly's Records, bought this album, came back. Thankfully, no one was home. The only record player we had in the house was in my sister's room. So I snuck in there, took the record out, and it looked really cool, and I put on God Save the Queen, which I'd heard about, because this was the most notorious song. And within moments of hearing that, I thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard, and this is the type of music I want to play.
Certainly in the early going in the Victoria punk scene, we were completely influenced by the British punk rock scene, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the spiky hair, the safety pins.
I've been listening to boogie rock and progressive rock and fusion jazz and not really realizing how bored I was getting of the whole thing. And then I saw a full-page ad in the Rolling Stone for a band called the Ramones.
Take it, Diddy!
And I looked at it and thought, those guys don't look like brothers. And listened to it and went, oh. It was like a bit of a revelation to me to hear all the stuff that I really liked about rock music without all the crap, without the 20-minute album with the 15 minutes of filler. Dark Side of the Moon.
We bought Pistols' first, only record. We bought Road to Ruin by the Ramones, and we bought the Clash's first record all in one go. And that was sort of our introduction to punk rock on record.
I was a big fan of Frank Zappa always as a kid. And Frank Zappa is probably as big an influence on the Dayglows as any other band was, or any punk band was, probably, really. The satirical sarcasm. He saw an awful lot in the world and made an awful lot of good commentary.
Broken hearts for assholes, are you an asshole too? What you gonna do if you're an asshole?
Bands like Led Zeppelin, who made fine records, but they were rock stars. You knew that you could never play as well as Jimmy Page. It just seemed also distant and also far away. And what punk did, and particularly the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, came along and just wiped all of that from the table. And suddenly, you felt like anything was possible.
I figured after hearing a couple of punk rock records that anybody could do that, so it
was the Sex Pistols, right?
Sex Pistols and Clash and probably DOA almost immediately also, yeah. So I think DOA probably sold it more for me.
Let's go, son!
So many songs on albums of that era are about being in a rock band and touring and making it with the ladies. And you hear DOA talking about living in some dive or getting harassed by some local cop, and you think, well, that's Vancouver, right? It's very real.
Yeah, that was the other thing. I was like, DOA is like right over there. These guys have been doing this for years, and they're the best fucking band in the world. You know? It seemed like at the time, and I think at one point they were one of the best punk bands in the world.
Yeah,
sort of the Chuck Biscuits era. Yeah. Hardcore 81, one of the best punk records anybody's ever made.
I worked at the Commons Block kitchen in the residence of Victoria University, and DOA came and played. And all the people who were there, mainly engineers who would just come there to razz punk rock. And DOA just basically intimidated them. You could see Joey at the microphone going,
Loading up.
between every verse. And this guy come up to him like this, and he reached down to him like this, right in his face.
In those days, we'd like wring out a shirt and pour sweat on him and blood. It was all kind of like a whole mixture of humanity, right? So, which people may recoil at these days.
Then the fight starts.
And then beer bottles. I remember Randy Rampage got a beer bottle smashed against his hands, wiping the blood, making the most of it.
So I finally warned him, hey, don't throw stuff, we're gonna get you, right? So about the third time I said, okay, we're gonna get you. So I had my guitar over my head, Randy has bass over his head, and Chuck had a cymbal stand over his head, right? And we waded into the audience, and I felt like Moses. The Red Sea parted. They all got the fuck out of the way as we came at them, like, we're gonna fucking kill you. And nobody threw anything more after that. But the right person told me, it's just like, okay, so that's what punk rock is. That's fucking crazy.
It wasn't any kind of energy you would ever see, you know, at the, you know, the Doobie Brothers
or the cover band down at Harpo's.
Cover band down at Harpo's.
It was just like like an explosion of some kind.
DOA was a huge influence on me. That's why it was such a treat to get to play with them. The logo, the name, everything was perfect. There was something, an impact there that I knew I would like, even though I hadn't heard them.
DOA played a legendary show at the Leonardo da Vinci Hall with a band called the Xenon X Band, which was just the sick fucks while they were turning into the Dayglows. And that was, I think, if I remember correctly, that was the gig that convinced the people that ran the Leo da Vinci to never have another live gig there again.
And this was our second indoctrination to Victoria. So it was unique both times.
And so punk rock just was like a bang. It was just people who obviously didn't give a shit, mad as hell about virtually everything, which I kind of shared in my own little way, and making very gritty and very energizing rock and roll.
It's like, and we can all play music. You know, we can have all our own bands and put on our own shows.
Didn't matter what kind of band. We didn't even think of concept, name, what type of songs we'd play, or who would play what. Just buy a bass, we'll get a band, we'll play. And I think a lot of bands during that time began that way.
It was just like, wow, this is going on. And then suddenly all around town there was all these little bands. Everyone started doing it. Started popping up.
Before there was any kind of bar punk rock scene in this town. It was all halls. It was all 18-year-old kids getting their dad to sign on a deposit for a hall and then, wondering what he's going to do because all the urinals got ripped off the wall. The big gig that sort of set the whole scene here was the Ray Ellis Dance Studio gig, which I can't even remember who played at it now. But that was where the whole Victoria punk scene kind of came together as a sort of an united entity, I guess you might say.
First big gig I went to was probably Victoria's first big punk gig, and that was the gig at Ray Ellis Dance Studio with the Infamous Scientists and Twisted Minds, and I went to that, and there was no looking back after that point in time.
Everybody who was into punk was there. It was like our whole 1976-77 period in one night.
Yeah.
The whole scene came together, and from that, everything kind of went and snowballed and went on for like the next 3-4 years.
Yeah.
To me, from my way of thinking, from that night.
The band that was around before that didn't play that night, obviously, was the Dayglows. I have a feeling every show they played, they probably got barred for life from wherever that was. So every show they had a new name.
That is a good point, is that they were the first
they were definitely the grand
Victoria band that I know of who started renting halls and putting on their own show.
Yeah.
You're 13 years old and you see like a naked 22-year-old Jesus bonehead behind the drums. You're like, shit. They were dudes that drank beer, fucked girls.
Yeah.
We didn't drink beer or fuck girls back then.
We were little kids, but they were like heavy. They were the heavy hitters.
Scary.
We were definitely the most hated band for miles around because we were kind of from the other side of the tracks. The punk scene initially in Victoria was coming out of Oak Bay kind of thing like that. It was a lot of upper middle class kids. Their parents, they, you know, a lot of them had a bit of a music background, and they had the ability to get instruments. Their parents could afford to buy them instruments, so we stole our instruments. All of the other kids were afraid of us to start with because we were genuine convicted juvenile delinquents and stuff. Our bass player Spud had actually just finished doing a year in jail, and it was funny. I remember some of the people that I made friends with, like John and Rob from No Means No and stuff, very straight, kind of geeky guys from Oak Bay and stuff like that, and it was kind of funny making friends with. I always got along good with that type of person anyway. I was always a bit of a computer geek and stuff myself, but it took a little while for us to be accepted by these people. We came across as, you know, we'd spit on the crowd, throw bottles at them and start fights. We weren't going to let the crowd get the one up on us. We took the game to them.
My father was the probation officer for, I believe, 2 members of the Dayglow abortion. So when I was 13 years old in 1987, I decided I wanted to interview the Dayglows. When I showed up there with my tape recorder and my pile of questions, I woke everybody up in this big punk house. And within about 5 minutes of me sitting there, one of them disclosed to the other that was Russ Flower's son, you know, and just everybody burst into laughter. But I think my father was concerned because a lot of his teenage clients were metalheads and punks that were getting into trouble because they were misunderstood and there was nowhere to go.
Came out and immediately became Jello Biafra's favorite band. I always thought they was total noise until time came for me to record their second 7-inch in my Hole in the Wall studios, which was named because it had a hole in the wall. We did the Neo's second single there. And after a while I realized they play the songs the same way every time. It just sounds like chaotic noise.
They were hardcore punk before there even was hardcore punk. Totally original. Completely original. I mean, they said that they set out to be the world's fastest band. Which, although there are people since that time, you know, Napalm Death or whoever, who were probably faster. At the time, I bet they were the world's fastest band.
The Neos influenced so many bands. They were a genre-starting band. Never took themselves very seriously. They were phenomenal.
We would go watch them practice in this tiny, tiny little room. And the drums were at the back, and there was this little tiny Sears amp, this little plastic thing sitting on one side and some other kind of amp on the other side. It would be blisteringly hot in there. And then they would practice at breakneck speed. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And it was amazing. It was better than any Neos gig, actually.
For me, the Neos was about the practices. The practices were like the
more intense.
Yeah, they were like a religious experience. Like, lock yourself in this room, get super hot in there, just play like crazy, and it was like such a release. It was like this really like you know, spiritual.
It was great.
Experience.
You look forward to it. Look forward to band practice.
It was like the best thing in the week.
We will send them all around the river to kill the bloody underground river. Rape their women, their whores, their puta. Everything they have is yours, El Puta. We just want to stay in our stately homes. The chairs on which we sit are made of human bones.
No Means No always honored Victoria. They had Victoria sentiments. And they were incredibly talented and extraordinary.
Say bullets fly, hear children cry, hear people die. Say bullets fly, say bullets fly.
No Means No have become world players. They're a class act, respected around the world.
I see the rich guns go pop. 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 Da 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 da.
They were from here. And on the one hand, I got to hang out in like John and Rob's kitchen and play hearts with them. And then on the other hand, I would get to see them on stage. And when they were on stage, they're always like completely different people to me. Off stage, you know, John's kind of goofy and Rob's really old and they live with their mom in this nice little house in the suburbs. But when they got on stage, they were just such monsters and such gods, and it was so amazing to be that close to those people.
And they were so good to us. I mean, all those people, they encouraged us when we were lousy. They helped us record.
Oh, yeah.
They just were always so positive.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing about Rob and John Wright is they were, and even later bands I played in later, they would record us for free and come to our shows and make live recordings, and they were just so supportive. It was brilliant. You know, I could go over to his house anytime and sit down at the kitchen table and we'd hang out for 2 hours and we'd just talk about shit. You're younger and more impressionable, and this person's point of view does influence you, and you know, I think it was a real positive. It was way different than I would have ever encountered otherwise, because there was none of that, you know, in my school or anything.
I think I played my first show with No Means No at the end of 1982. I knew John and Rob already in the time of the infamous Scientists. Rob had recorded our first 7-inch EP in his mom's basement. And between the first EP and the second EP, John had joined the band.
It was a fun band to play in, and yeah, Andy was like an amazing frontman. He came from a background of drama in high school. We formed out of Reynolds High School, and that was our first gig, was playing the gymnasium at lunch hour. And we actually charged money. It was 50 cents, but it wasn't for us. It was for, I think, a field trip for a class or something.
Definitely two of the best records to ever come out of Victoria.
No way!
For whatever reason that none of us can remember, actually, the infamous Scientists ceased to be. And shortly afterwards, Rob and John said, why don't you do some songs with us?
Teresa, what would you die for? What would you die for? What would you die for, Teresa? What would you die for?
Our first big tour was 3 weeks going across Canada, and all the way out to Montreal, and came back. I took along a tent, a Coleman stove, and didn't make any money at all, of course. But we met a lot of nice people along the way, and Steve Bailey from the Neil had written Jello Biafra and said, you gotta see these guys live, they're really good. So Biafra and other people from Alternative Tentacles came out to see us in San Francisco, which eventually led to us being signed to Alternative Tentacles. And suddenly we were in Europe, and getting paid really well, and getting fed really well, and we thought we'd died and gone to heaven.
as much as I got inspired from No Means No and stuff, but was Scott Henderson was super inspiring. He was super DIY. He built studios and got by with very little gear and just a whole lot of knowledge and patience.
We'd be in there for 12 hours straight. We'd show up the next day and he'd be like, oh, look, I added this to your song.
Scott Henderson has been a huge part of this music scene for well over 30 years.
He was the guy forever. There was nobody else doing it. Scott's a wizard.
Back in the good old days before punk rock, if you wanted to record anything, you had to go to the local emporium of sound and pay them $65 an hour so they could sneer at how bad your music was. So I decided I couldn't afford that, so I learned how to do all that sort of thing myself, which was what a lot of people were doing back in the mid to late 70s. They would buy a 4-track Tascam and they would buy a handful of mics and try to make their own little masterpieces at home.
You wrote your own songs. You put out records on or cassettes on your own label. You had your friends help out with the door. You or a friend of yours put on the show. You guys helped bring the PA back to the place you'd rented it from. You helped, sweep the floor after the show was done. That is DIY. It keeps you very grounded.
It just gave me that ability to know that I could try anything, and I didn't have to be afraid of trying, even though I might fail. And it just gave me the ability to feel more confident with myself and not worry about fitting into the regular mold.
DIY is basically the best way to live your life. Do it yourself. I mean, why is that even why do we even have a thing called oh my God, you're very DIY, you did it yourself. Well, yeah.
You wanna go to the fucking street, but the energy, you burn when you die, only the right way to come in life. Listen to that, and the TV, get on your head. They don't soldier, find the pack, raise your record, and find the dead. That's right.
Red Tide played with the Dead Kennedys to the Free the Five benefit, which was a huge deal. Having the Dead Kennedys come to town for a cause that I was pretty youthfully supportive of. I guess the West Coast flavor to Red Tide would be the fact that we were influenced by a lot of West Coast bands, and we were just trying to do something different. We had a surf song that we'd always pick for Craig and Paul, and the Neos influenced us to really play Guts and Short. But I think the West Coast thing is also just the way that we present ourselves too. The name of the record, Calvin Salal, that was just also kind of being like anti-punk, like not wanting to come up with punk rock type names and just trying to branch out a little bit. Red Tide is a West Coast term, really.
Red Tide are such an important group in the history of contemporary non-commercial rock music in Victoria. They transcended genres and eras in Victorian music, from beginning as a very powerful, talented, tight hardcore band in '82 as Suburban Menace, to very quickly shifting to having this socio-political folk sort of hardcore thing going on. For me, they're really this quintessential West Coast group. All their earlier hardcore era stuff is also brilliant and has been released, around the world. But Where Sea Meets Sky, this is an amazing song. Red Tide ended by recording an album that never came out. However, in that period, they would have gigged with Green River and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, two of the West Coast's biggest groups from the late 80s. They were extremely talented.
It was like having sex for the first time. It was just like we're just doing it, and that's the whole thing. Not of whether it's good or it's bad. It's just there's sharing it with people, and it's there, and it's now, and it's happening. When you're a kid, like, your scene is the only scene that matters, and like fuck the rest, and like you're doing it, and like all the old people can go fuck themselves.
Punk rock involved a lot of people besides musicians. I mean, there was a lot of art. There's a lot of art around it. There's an artistic component. There's an exciting component, and a musical component, social component. So it was all these things. And if you were just watching the band, you could just jump up and down. You could sort of be part of the show.
You could be part of the show.
There wasn't really a distinction between the band and the audience. Maybe some drama that was being played out between some couple that was breaking up over here was just as much of as part of the scene as the person who had drank too much and was throwing up in the corner, as was the bass player who had just broken a string and changing the string, as was the cops who were coming by to shut down the show because it was too loud. All those things combined to make a scene, and that's why it's called a scene. Music is just part of that.
Everybody was very supportive of each other. So there was artists and musicians and everybody all hanging out at the same parties and living together in the same houses.
Lots of cross-fertilization of ideas.
And Victoria too, I think, just to focus on that scene, being sort of separated from the rest of the world, it had to rely on itself to create its own scene. I think Vancouver was a little more of the I think it was tougher for bands to. They had to deal with more. I don't know how to describe
competition.
It. The competition,
and there was more cliques,
and the business of it, and the cliques of it.
And we didn't have that in Victoria. It was just we were just a bunch of kids, and it was a small town, and there wasn't anyone around saying, "Oh, I think we could really set up a Victoria scene and make some money out of this." No, they were kind of doing that in Vancouver, but over here, so it was just like, let's play a show, and I think we can rent some gear, and we can.
My mom can sew the curtains.
Like the one I was telling you
kind
about.
Kind of our gang-ish.
There was a big plate of cookies there, and it was just like, donate. This was an early punk show I went to. Someone said, "Oh, I'm just going to make a bunch of cookies."
It's a show.
And it's a gig. And this is with the Infamous Scientists and Pink Steel and the Neos or something. And then there's a big plate of cookies there by donation.
Pink Steel, totally.
So, yeah.
And the Neos, yay.
They could coexist because there weren't that many other bands,
Yeah, it wasn't.
So it was just kind of small.
You could all eat of the cookies.
Youth culture at that time, to me, was extremely in a very small box, and if you stepped out of that box at all, and it was like an instant hellstorm. You just got threats of violence and people you thought were your friends just telling you to go fuck yourself.
I never understood that at all. Like,
I'm going to beat you up because I don't like the music you listen to. Why do you care what music I listen to? Like, people are threatened. I mean, really were threatened. Punk rock was a threat.
Parents didn't like it, teachers didn't like it, kids at school didn't like it. It was, but we had our own group, and that was the kind of cool thing, that we had our own little thing that was different from everybody else. And that was what I think the big thing that was important, is we had our own identity, and we made it up as we went along.
For me, punk means no rules. So, you should really feel liberated under that umbrella.
It's nice to be in a thing where you're expected to push the envelope a little bit. You're not punished for doing it.
A punk rock band called Dayglow Abortions has had several hundred of its record albums seized by police at an Ottawa record store. The band's Toronto record manufacturer is charged with distributing obscene material, the first time the charge has been used against a record company.
Well, my feelings on obscenity are, I have a 3-year-old son, and personally I find a lot of what he watches on TV really bothers me. That's why a lot of my lyrics came from the original ideas were founded in a TV show or a TV commercial.
I've been playing punk rock for 30 some odd years now, I guess, something like that, I guess if you can call it that. I've never really been convinced that I've been much of a punk rocker. I was sort of older than the punk scene. I was kind of already well entrenched in my own musical taste when punk came about. And Daiglow's first album was really not really a punk rock album. It was more of a satire of punk rock than anything else. The Dayglows have been typically a band of satire and sarcasm and stuff like that. Comedy is a very effective tool for getting complex politics across to people. You can get ideas to people that they will listen to something that they would normally not accept at all if it's done under the guise of a joke.
The music was smart. It was very funny at times, in a very dark way. They were also very honest songs.
You know, the punk scene was really, really smart,
smart,
and that was a huge difference too between the punk music scene, I think, and the mainstream music scene. Is that, you know, we have all these clever people doing things that are interesting and entertaining.
People quickly find out how much personal satisfaction you get from playing and stuff, and you feel so great about yourself. And plus, it's your revolution now, eh? You're at the forefront of it all. You're yelling and barking your ideas off of the stage. You've got a bunch of people listening to you. It's a really great and empowering, self-empowering thing.
The great thing about the punk rock scene was you could have your these people would be, I don't know if you want to call them your idols, but these are the guys, you're buying their records. You think they're really good bands, and they come to town and they might well sleep on your floor, which I always thought was so cool, because if you're a young girl in those days listening to Duran Duran, the likelihood of ever meeting Duran Duran is just slim and none. And they exist in this star world that's nowhere you can never get access to them. Well, that was never the case with punk rock. X played in Victoria once, and after the show came over to Vancouver House, which was where a bunch of us lived, so the center of the local punk scene, I guess, there back then. And yeah, they came back and drinks afterwards, and we all got completely hammered in the kitchen.
You could talk to the people that blew your minds. They weren't magazine. You could actually gather up your pals and go and talk to someone and go, that was great. And you'd be like, right on, thanks, man. You know? It seemed a little more approachable. And people were they were people. Not normal people. Not normal people. They're pretty fucked up, but they were people.
And we had a whole slew of good bands. We had bands like Husker Du played here, Saccharine Trust played with them. Really Red played here from Texas, who were a really good band. Toxic Reasons played here back in the day. The Black Flag played here routinely.
Rise above, we're gonna rise above. They distort what we say. Rise above.
And the Subhumans played here a little bit. Dead Kennedys played here pretty early on. It was not until the early 80s that we started getting bands making an effort to come play Victoria.
When I was 20, the bunch of fucking goofs walked into Bonehead's house, all 9 of them, you know, like mohawks and fucking pit bulls and wrenches and machetes and shit. And I was just like, this is rad.
Bonehead's house that used to have gigs at, and the Hell House. There's just it rotated from house to house to house. There'd be a place that had for 6 months or even less sometimes would have gigs every couple of weeks and that kind of thing. And some great bands played there. I mean, Green Day playing at Bonehead's place. And DRA played in the basement with Rat's Nest.
I would say the Rat's Nest is probably one of maybe 4 places in the city that are the most important places in the history of this scene.
DRI, Dirty Rotten Imbeciles, played here one night a long time ago, and I remember I fucking spent all day with customs trying to get them across the border because I was like, hey, we're having a wedding and DRI's coming up to play. Yeah, what kind of wedding does DRI play at? Yeah, for sure. Anyway, I got them across the border. It started at 6 a.m. in the morning, and then they caught the last ferry, 10 o'clock from Vancouver, and they made it here at midnight. And then we had to form a human barrier. We all held hands or wrists or whatever we were holding on to hold people back while they moshed behind us. And it was one of the hardest nights of my life. I was so sore the next day from people beating on me.
The crowd was going off, but there was no room to move. It was just kind of like going like this. And I actually passed out because it was so hot and I'd been screaming so much. And I didn't fall. I woke up still in the exact same position because the press was so tight.
Yeah, that's just where I first started attending punk rock shows regularly. Where I first got to meet touring bands and actually get to speak with them, and I think where I first started playing as well. So it's a lot of good memories, and like Rob was saying, some of those bands coming through and playing bass, that was just amazing.
I saw a No Means No show there in December once too, and it was incredible.
So finally, when I was 13 years old, I went to my first show at the Rat's Nest. It was Monkey Juice, No Means No, The Resistance, Section 46. There were so many people packed into that basement. You were absorbing the sweat from the people that were pushed up against you.
I started playing music in 1984, I think. 1985, actually, when my oldest boy's mom left me for some naval man. I got a set of drums and started beating the shit out of them with a picture on them. And next thing you know, 4 months later, I was on the way to Halifax with the Resistance. we had Steve Bailey come in one day and had a little 4-track, and we recorded a whole bunch of things. I thought I knew how to play drums until I heard myself, and then I realized I had a lot to learn. And we went from there, and then I started buying pieces of gear, more pieces of gear, and now I'm just surrounded by gear everywhere. And yeah, learned to use it and become proficient with it, and here I am now, an old man ready to die.
People that contribute to the community. Gary Brainless was one of those people that, God, I couldn't believe. My first show, he just happened to be there. My drum set was falling apart, and he fixed it for me, you know, while I was playing. And he was just so amazing at that. And he ran the Rat's Nest, which he had amazing punk gigs there all the time. Strange, you know, how punk rock affects people, you know. I don't think he ever got paid for all the work he did, not even once. And I guess the payoff is that you get to be around all these amazing bands and characters.
Oh, the Dayglows came down here to do a song for the Trooper tribute album, and it just happened that Trooper was playing at the old Ingraham Hotel, and Dayglows went over there and grabbed them out of there before their show and brought it back here to do background vocals on their own cover song, which was pretty great. No Means No, they recorded and did I think it was Sex Mad and the Wrong demos here. And I don't know whatever came of them, but they were pretty fucking good. Pretty fucking good. And yeah, they'd always bring me down and say, "Hey, Garrett, check this out." And I'd sit down against the wall and close my eyes and thought I saw God. If there was a God, I saw him that day.
If I had to pick a #1 fucking band in Victoria, B.C., I picked Shovelhead. Nothing was like that, and nothing ever will be like that. These guys were doing fucking King Crimson covers. Better than King Crimson did them on album. They were doing stuff like the Bad Brains. They were doing bands like the Squirrel Bait. You know, and Henderson is the most humble guy on the planet. All of a sudden he's like, you're like, whoa, look at this guy play the guitar. He's like Frank Zappa.
I saw Shovelhead open for No Means No at the Commodore Ballroom. It was amazing. It was just to see them play in front of so many people and be so good. Like, they were such a tight, technical, weird, awesome band.
We ended up jamming. That's how Shovelhead was sort of born. We all agreed that, you know, we should do this funky, fast, spastic, high-energy music.
Who was in the band?
Chris Buck, who later was known as Chris Parker, who is sadly not with us anymore, and Kenny Kempster, who also went on to become the second drummer in No Means No for their brief twin drum incarnation. And Kenny also played, well, actually Chris and Ken both played in the Showbusiness Giants, because the Showbusiness Giants, basically everybody played in the Showbusiness Giants.
That Blobs compilation that had a couple of Showbusiness Giant songs on it, which I thought were really great. And that came out just before I moved to Vancouver. And I met Tom shortly afterwards in Victoria, and then it was a matter of weeks before he asked me to join the band. That was right around the time that they were finishing up the Maybe It's Just Me record. I think that probably within the space of 5 months, he became basically my favorite songwriter in the world and one of my best friends, and remains so to this day. And it didn't hurt that he came with references from Carol and Mark.
That's it, baby. Just lie down and relax. What are you doing? Leave me alone. No, my neck.
Showbusiness Giants are the best band, and they're my favorite band. And maybe it's, a testament to my alleged punk rock nature that my favorite album of all time was deleted on the day it came out. So the Let's Have a Talk with the Dead came out on Virgin Records, and it never had a chance, but it's one of my favorite records of all time.
Lucky to grow up in Victoria because we had such amazing, what became internationally renowned bands right here, and we could go down to the Fernwood Community Center and have our minds blown for $3.
Because it's a small place, all of the groups of people, all the disparate groups of music were jammed together, and there were very different bands on one bill.
There was no sort of demarcation. It was just like anything that was original and off the wall and had a funny haircut,
or was your friend,
or was your pal, was on the bill.
And the bands that emerged were so incredible.
When I saw Mission of Christ come on stage and play for the very first time, yeah, the vibe fucking changed. It was like No Means No. There was people like going and doing this, and they had mohawks and stuff. And then MOC came on, and somebody brought a fucking dry ice machine or something. And like every long-haired dude from downtown Victoria to like Sydney and fucking Port Hardy was right there. The pit was violent, and it scared the shit out of me, but at the same time, I wanted to go back the very next night.
There was a lot of friction between punk and metal. I liked both. I got into underground music, at a period when that crossover was beginning. But if you looked even a little bit punk when you went to a metal show, it was very dangerous. It was a very violent crowd.
The dividing line between metal and punk rock for a long time was adversary. And I think at some point in the mid-'80s, Mission of Christ changed that. In Victoria, punk rockers and metalheads have been friends ever since.
There wasn't a clash of culture or anything like that. Everyone was together in the same sort of forward movement.
Southern culture, don't check. Backwards and near the fucking distance. Don't come back. None of my nose regretted something I've ever done. You are not there. Don't come back. You are not there. Don't come back. You are not there. Don't come back. You are not there. You are not there.
Victoria-based musicians that have inspired me over the years. Two names that come to mind are Rob Nesbitt and Tony Galuza. What you get from them is 100% them. There's no chemicals, there's no alcohol, there's no nothing. They bring an intensity and a passion to what they do that's unrivaled. Like, there's nobody that puts out more than those two guys when they put it on. So you can imagine when they're in the same band, it's a pretty awesome fucking spectacle.
From the police! Never surrender! From the police!
I had a lot of friends who maybe were verging on substance abuse problems, and their reaction when they would find out that I was straight edge was, "That's awesome, that's great." But in the punk scene, everything was acceptable.
Before I was edge, like bands like mine I just thought were phenomenal. But back then it perplexed me that a band could be that intense and be straight. The two didn't connect back then, but you don't have to get loaded. You can actually still have a good time.
Shutdown were, I would say, almost like a sister band to us. Use that term. We did share a split tape with them, and they seemed more professional than everyone else from the moment they started playing, and they were exciting to watch.
Shutdown is one of my favorite all-time Victoria bands. They had 3 different singers, and each one of them was really good at what they did, but was really different than the other singer. So everything they did was really cool.
We opened for No Effects when they were just starting to roll up at the UVic. That was killer. We played with Bad Religion. The best shows were the local ones, where we'd have like Section 46 or Disciples of Abelard or just shit like that. Soul Charge was a good local band back then. Just like smaller stuff was really cool. I can't really think what I was doing before punk rock. It's just another extension of everything else. Like, it's just part of the music I was involved with. I didn't try to find punk, man. Punk found me. Like, straight up.
I was educated by punk rock.
Record and document management. Organization of corporate structures. Conspiracy. If you can't control information, you can't control people.
Such a domino effect. From the first time I got to play live with Pigment Vehicle, I would say that I've just been completely addicted to music ever since.
There's an example of total original Victoria music. Crazy Time Changes, Math Equation Fills by Jason Bonneau.
A lot of the bands at that time were active in making art and producing little piddly-ass cassettes on incentive records and selling them at Lyle's place. It was all very cute and wonderful and quaint, and nobody had any large aspirations of breaking out of that. We just wanted to do it there, you know, and play music for our friends, have our friends play music for us. And, you know, we were making records that sound like they come from a basement. And that was half the thrill, it was half the fun.
You don't say.
You had the original guys. You had your Neos and Jerk Ward and Red Tide, No Means No Dayglows playing OAP Hall or wherever, and the next group of kids coming up and then starting bands like Section 46 or Onion House or Hudson Mac, Goat Boy, Render Useless, and this is all brought in through all ages shows.
Kids had nowhere to go here. There was nothing for kids to do here. There's nothing, there still isn't really anything for kids to do here. And there certainly wasn't back then. I mean, if you didn't look the same or act the same, or if you were an outsider in any way, you were truly fucked here. I mean, so it was really great that somehow the truly fucking got together in these places like the OAP Hall or in basements. It's kind of a miracle that occurred.
All ages scene is important for kids just because it builds the heart. It gives them the heart of like doing something on their own without their parents, without you know, adults. It's like Charlie Brown. It's like we don't need your help and like we're okay. And it's like who would want their kid to be creative and expressing themselves, getting out, you know, either on a guitar or drums or bass or vocally as opposed to beating someone up.
It's a place that allows you to try things and see how you feel about things, and maybe even you're trying on a persona that might be actually the real you. It might develop into being a more real you. But it's a place that's accepting and supportive, and it allows you to be all these different things at different times and without question, you know. It's a safe place.
Regardless of what part of the scene you were in or anywhere you were, the sense of camaraderie and community and bringing people in and introducing folks was unbelievable. And I think that as a person who had moved to Victoria and I knew nobody. My first show into Victoria, I knew nobody. And I left that show going home drunk with folks and having a fantastic time and made a ton of friends. And I think, and was in a band within like 8 months of being in the city. Folks that were playing straight edge hardcore. There were people playing pop punk. There were people playing metal. There were people playing alt country. There were people like Dave who would put nylons on his head, run around the stage with a drum machine on, yelling and screaming through distorted vocals, and no one had a fucking clue what he was doing. And then next would come up would be a full-on hardcore band, right? And how those two bands could be playing at the same show and mesh, and everybody be cool with it was totally fine. Think about the lasting impact that a cultural movement like punk rock can have on people and have on a city. Punk rock in Victoria has done that, and it's proof in the pudding because it's still here today.
Punk was a social thing for me because I had I met people that were cool in school and they were into whatever. And fuck, I went to a high school where if you weren't on the A team in hockey, you weren't allowed to hang out with those fucking people. I wouldn't go fucking near a Squamwell High School or Central or Vic West, being a kid that grew up in Gordon Head, going to Arbutus and Mount Doug and Lambert and shit. It's like, why would I want to go to these places? And all of a sudden, we start getting into skateboarding and punk rock, and all of a sudden you're meeting guys from the Squamwell, and you're meeting guys from Obey. And the guys from Obey aren't rich, they're rowdy. It's like everybody had a chip on their shoulder. Everybody had something to prove.
Dustin is a cartoon character come to life. He is larger than life. I met him mid-1985, 1986, and they invited me to go skate with them. Didn't know who I was. I was like, come skate. Like, okay, let's go. And I had to run with my skateboard under my arm to keep up with them.
My bitch man, she looks stiff. Fuck the fuck, you won't fuck with us. You fucking fucks, you're all fucking.
There's like a whole crew of bands that are gigging right now that have been around for 5 or 6 years or 10 years over the last decade or so. AWT, K-Killers, Who's Cow, they just broke up, but they were around for quite a while.
There is renewed interest in this style of music, and I'm not sure why. It's potentially because there's so much garbage out there right now. Like really is not a lot of good music being made right now. People are getting sick of it. And I think the backlash is they go the opposite. They go like, well, I hate this. What's the opposite of this? Oh, well, raw, real, awesome, great, hardcore, aggressive, fast music. Punk. All right.
Your interpretation of what the fuck's punk is your own thing. To me, it's rock and roll that's not for everybody, right? It's not supposed to be liked by everybody. I don't want it to be liked by everybody. If it did, I'd be playing that horrible shit they keep playing on the radio, right? You want a certain crowd to like it because it's discriminating against the fucking bullshit music. So you play good, to me it's good, hard, fucking non-pop, man. You're all pieces of garbage.
Gotta hand it to AWT. They tour, they're great live. They put on an awesome show.
Trying to pop your seat. That's what living down. Tell us what we're lacking. Don't tell us what we need. We're not dumb enough to follow. Not smart enough to.
They're in the lifestyle for real.
Yeah.
They're living the lifestyle. They're in it.
Punk rock has changed a lot and got all new different kinds of sort of styles under its wing and everything like that, but anything is still valid, and that's one of the nice things about punk rock.
Punk rock put a lot of energy back into live shows, and punk rock really demanded participation from the audience. It wasn't about being dull, and the audience, it was as important for the audience to be expressing that energy, and that just made the bands play harder. And the bands would play harder and the audiences would get more into it. And that's kind of what made punk rock so exciting, as opposed to a lot of other music that just wasn't exciting and didn't have that impact. I saw some brilliant musicians, some brilliant music and bands, but you sat and listened. You weren't part of what was going on. And punk rock was always about being part of what's going on. The audience was half the show.
It was just a time where that struck, and that was the common chord that erupted with all this creativity and all these people. And then whatever they went on to do after that, they can really credit that initial Jam, Sex Pistols, DK's album that they heard as what set them off.
A lot of the people that were doing that, I know, have their own businesses now. They do their own business. They don't work for the fucking government. They don't work for other fucking companies. They have their own bakeries. They have their own, like, they played, they used to have great bands, and maybe still do, but they also do their own businesses and stuff. That ethic is in them.
I think if I hadn't been in a punk band, I wouldn't have ended up teaching in a university, because, it's kind of nerve-wracking to get up in front of people and talk, and I think that initially I just sort of approached it like a gig.
I opened a little music school. I love teaching people, kids, adults, music that they would never normally hear. So the album Mama, by No Means No, it's like a Bible in my studio. It's one thing that really attracts me to music in general, is that you see these personalities, and when they perform, this really authentic expression comes out. And in punk rock, it happened constantly. People were hypnotizing themselves into just, they're sweating like crazy and they're working so hard. I remember Murray Acton saying to me, punk rockers should have like sports medicine trainers to help us recover after gigs. We need that, because it's really hard on your body night after night. It is a tough sport to play, but it's really fun.
You've seen what you can do, more than you dare.
There's still house shows, there's still all ages shows, and it's still very weird, it's still very eclectic, and it's very community based. I'll keep going to house shows in Victoria until I'm 80 years old.
The beautiful thing about punk really is it is a youth rebellion that you don't have to grow out of. you don't grow out of it. Like, you get into this when you're a kid and you're a teenager or whatever, and you're like losing your mind. It's like, yeah, you know, fuck my parents, fuck the system. Like, this is bullshit. And you start growing up a bit, and you're just like, okay, you know, my parents maybe not so bad. But at the same time, you're like, wow, the system really does suck. So, you know, you sort of change gears a bit, but you can still be punk rock and play music and lose your mind. And Victoria's a prime example of that. Like, the scene still involves, to this day, people who started it.
Felt like only 100 people were involved in it at the time. It just meant so much. And still does, as far as I'm concerned.
I think punk rock should be a prerequisite for everybody in order to express themselves. I think in mental health, music is a huge deal.
You don't need approval from anybody for what you're doing, that you're just going to go and do it. I mean, this is the greatest thing about it, and it still stands today. Punk had a huge influence on people's lives and really taken them on a path to discovering who they are. I don't think it's an easy path, though. You know, I think if you're going to do it yourself, it's going to be hard.
And the best art is the ones that make you stop and think about something or feel something. And music makes you feel something. And I think if people feel things, it's good for their soul. And what's good for their soul is, you know, good for the community.
There is a Section 46 song, very, very important. I really feel that it's an anthem for the late 80s in Victoria, and it's called Somewhere to Go. And it's about not having a place to go. Not having a place to go where you could just be creative without consuming, without having to pay. Just a really alternative and positive place for kids. Not the Boys and Girls Club, not some outreach center for troubled youth. Just a place to be yourself. And I think that these Friday and Saturday night all ages shows, they were a haven for us. They were that place. They were that little utopia where we could feel free to be who we were, to express ourselves, and not abide by any set of rules of how you had to do anything.
Size of city. It's like there's Athens, Georgia, Akron, Ohio. There's these centers, these little towns that just seem to produce a lot of music because, you know, you're off the beaten track and you kind of have to do it yourself, make it happen.